Hello everyone, Caitlin here. As Discovery of Witches just finished airing on AMC in North America, we thought we'd celebrate with another bonus episode. During our regular episodes, we had short science sections with Dr. Anya, but when we were recording them, we all got super into it and recorded way more than we had time for in an episode. So I've edited together the full science sections from our first 3 episodes. You may notice when listening that there is no Mandy in these recordings, and that is because sadly her files have been lost to the depths of time. But as it is mostly Dr. Anya just schooling us anyways, we thought it worked. So please enjoy and let us know if you like this, and let us know if you learned anything, because I certainly did.
Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Anya. I have a PhD in evolutionary biology, and I was really interested in participating in this podcast because I'm super interested in the way that science is portrayed in popular media and academia in general as well. And so I read the book off of a recommendation of some friends, and I thought it was really fascinating. And so I was super excited for the show as well. I also have some expertise in rowing, which isn't that important beyond this first episode, but I thought I would throw that in there as well. So I would say Diana's field isn't really alchemy. Her field is probably the history and philosophy of science, it's a little bit of a niche subject. Not all universities have a department of the history and philosophy of science. It's something that a few universities really specialize in. But yeah, so her topic within the history and philosophy of science would be alchemy. And alchemy is basically a philosophical and proto-scientific tradition that's been practiced for millennia on 3 different continents, so across Europe, Africa, and Asia. So it's a really broad field, and basically its goals are to purify and perfect certain objects and elements. And specifically, it's well known that like alchemists were, trying to turn things into gold. So basically, like turn certain elements into other elements. And so it's actually related to the modern discipline of chemistry, and they actually even have the same roots, alchemy and chemistry. It comes from the Greek term chemia, which means to fuse or cast a metal. And then alchemy is the Arabic form of that. A lot of Arabic words have, they start with the syllable al. So like algebra, alchemy. Yeah, so alchemy is much older than modern chemistry, but they actually overlapped a little bit in history. And what we think of as modern chemical science actually borrowed a lot of ideas and techniques that were developed earlier in alchemy. And so modern chemistry is, instead of trying to like perfect or transform elements, it's more interested in the scientific study of different elements and compounds and describing their composition, structure, properties, and behavior. And specifically like chemical reactions from one substance to another substance. And so based on modern chemistry, we know that there are like pure elements that are like the smallest subunits of matter, basically atoms. And then atoms can be combined into other molecules, chemicals, and substances. Whereas like alchemy didn't necessarily have that perspective. And so a lot of alchemy's goals are actually like pretty impossible, right? Because in order to change one element into another element, you have to change the number of protons. And that's just basically it's not technically impossible, but it's basically impossible. Like, you need a particle accelerator to get enough energy to do something like that. Like, messing with the nucleus of an atom is just so hard. And so what a lot of alchemy was trying to do, we actually can do it nowadays using modern physics, basically. But you need like $1 billion particle accelerator.
So, well, just a second. So how, I just learned so much. But if we can...
Okay, yeah, sorry. I guess that was like a lot of knowledge to drop all at once.
If we can do alchemy now, how long until we get the elixir of life?
So alchemy is philosophical and scientific, kind of fused together. So like, obviously, we're not going to be able to create an elixir of life to create immortality. Like, that's physically impossible. What I was talking about more
my
is...
hopes. It's fine.
Yeah. Alchemy's goals of sort of like being able to create gold or turn one element into another element. Like, we can kind of do that. It's like very expensive and energetically costly. And so it's like not really done on an industrial scale, but we kind of just do it for the love of science and to prove that we can. And it's only been possible for like the past couple decades. Maybe a little bit longer than that, but certainly since like, the 60s or 70s. Particle physics is not really my expertise. So I have friends that work at accelerators, but I don't know the field in depth enough to know all about the history of how that field developed.
Right. So I'll have to talk to one of them about becoming immortal.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. But I do think it's really interesting, right? The way that sort of like, in the popular conception, we think about, like science and pseudoscience, and they're like completely separate and don't really fuse together that much. But, it turns out that, what we think of as modern scientific chemistry owes so much of its techniques and ideas to alchemy. And, if you asked a chemist in the 40s and 50s, like, what was the difference between alchemy and chemistry, they would have said, like, oh, well, we can't turn elements into other elements, but like now we can. So at this point, like, chemistry really physics has come so far that we can sort of achieve these aims of alchemy that, seemed impossible before.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so there's actually a Smithsonian article that you guys can link in the show notes that talks about the sort of resurgence of history of science scholarship regarding alchemy that happened in the 1980s. And it's super fascinating. And you can see that Deborah Harkness, the author of the book, was drawing on a lot of real alchemy for her book. And if you read the article, you can see that Deborah Harkness was drawing on a lot of real historical alchemy for the book. And there's one quote in particular that I thought really illustrated that. The author says, historians of science began deciphering alchemical texts, which wasn't easy. The alchemists, obsessed with secrecy, deliberately described their experiments in metaphorical terms laden with obscure references to mythology and history. For instance, text that describes a cold dragon who creeps in and out of the caves was code for saltpeter, which is potassium nitrate, a crystalline substance found on cave walls that tastes cool on the tongue. And so Deborah Harkness, she's actually a real professor of history, and she teaches European history and history of science at the University of Southern California. And she's published two books of like nonfiction books, one of which is on alchemy. And so, yeah, she's basically like drawing a lot on her personal experience and expertise with alchemy, and sort of feeding that into Diana's research interests and the plot points of her book. And just as a side note, she also has an award-winning wine blog called Good Wine Under $20, which I think has also worked its way into the book because they're pretty much drinking wine in almost every scene.
Yeah. I always think of these books as like Deborah Harkness's James Bond, just complete wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I like it. It's great.
So I actually had a question for you guys. I was curious how old you thought Diana was based on the way that she's portrayed in the TV
So
show.
the book has an exact answer for this.
Mm, it's been too long.
In the book, she's 33.
Okay. That makes sense. That's like, yeah, that's like about as young as it would be reasonable for it to be. And I mean, it's like, it's on the young side, but it's like not too crazy for like a hot shot to get tenure at that age. I was just curious because I think a lot of people who like don't really understand the academic system or like how tenure works or like how long it takes to get a PhD wouldn't necessarily guess that she's in her mid 30s. And I actually think it's great that there's a heroine who's in her 30s because, you know, so much of, you know, like fantasy TV and books and stuff, you know, focuses on basically like high school age or like maybe college or mid 20s if you want to be kind of edgy. And so like, you know, heck yes, give me a heroine in her 30s.
Yeah,
I'll take it.
Definitely.
Yeah, so basically, you know, in terms of like how she would have gotten to her position, right? She would have had to get a bachelor's, you know, so you finish undergrad at maybe like 22, and then it would take like if you skip a master's and go straight into a PhD, you could probably finish a PhD in like 4 or 5 years. So then at that point, she's like 26 or 27. And then if she immediately gets a tenure track professor job, it usually takes about 7 years, at least in science, to get tenure. I don't know. It might work slightly differently for history. But even, yeah, I feel like some people might hear like, oh, she's so young. Like she's probably like 25. And it's like, no, 33 is really young for having tenure as a professor.
The actress was also, I think, 32. Or she is 32 now.
Okay.
So she about the same age.
Mm-hmm. That's good casting.
Yeah. The actress. I'll say
yeah,
Teresa Palmer is also 32.
That is the name of the actress? Okay. Clearly I've done my homework for this show. Yeah, in general, I thought the portrayal of academia in the show was really spot on. Especially like her interactions with Jillian early on. And that's sort of like, you know, faculty jobs are just like really few and far between and really hard to get. And so there's a lot of kind of like competition and career jealousy and awkwardness. And it's like, even, you know, like you don't have to want it. It's just like there and kind of unavoidable when you meet somebody and you're just sort of like, oh, it's been a few years. Like, you know, the last time I talked, you were doing this postdoc here. Like, what are you currently doing? And then when they're like, oh, well, I'm actually like kind of between stuff right now. Or, you know, like,
right.
I'm on my third postdoc. Like, yeah, I just, it just like made my heart ache a little bit with familiarity when they were doing all of that. The one thing that did strike me as unrealistic is that when Matthew goes into her apartment and like rifles through all her stuff, like it seems like she's only been in Oxford for about a week and she's only planning on being there for a year. Like I know a lot of people who, you know, travel around or move around for temporary positions and like we get very good at traveling light. I was like, there's no way she like actually had all of that stuff shipped from New Haven to Oxford. I did find it a little interesting or just like a little weird that, you know, she like gave this talk that everyone clearly loved. And then they were like, oh, you can just like write up, you know, like the paper's almost done, right? And she was like, yep, almost done. And then she's like literally going back to the library and reading like, you know, 15 new books that she's never read before. Like, that's not really how the academic workflow goes. Like, if you're presenting an hour-long seminar about a topic, it's, like, pretty complete. And she should be able to write it up without doing that much more research. You know, like, if she was able to do the talk without any of the Ashmole texts before, she should, like, all her Ashmole research should be for, like, her next paper or her, you know, her next book or something. I don't know.
I will say in the book she did not give a talk.
I see.
So
Right.
I think that was just there to visually introduce alchemy to the viewers.
I see. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, and I think overall it worked. And I think if you like aren't super familiar with the academic workflow and like how long it takes to put together a paper, it wouldn't have stuck out. But it did just kind of feel a little weird to me.
I can see that. It's also where Deborah Harkness had her cameo, and
Oh, she was in there. I totally missed that.
I
Where was it?
despise author cameos, no matter
What?
what.
You can't say that in the same week that Stanley just died.
I don't feel one way or the other really about Stanley. She was sitting on the right, kind of behind somebody. I guess my problem with author cameos is that I can never look anywhere else and they just seem so obvious to me. But also, I suppose not everybody out there like goes to author signings and follows authors on Twitter and that sort of thing. So it might not bother other people.
Oh yeah, I had no idea that it was in there.
Oh, well, lucky for you both.
And then I had one other final thing that I wanted to talk about with regard to the like academic-y and sciencey parts of the show, which was that my first reaction when watching the episode was I can't believe she's handling this like amazing ancient text with her bare hands. Like, don't you have to wear gloves for that? And so I sent a message to our friend Paul Moffat, who is at that Paul Moffat on Twitter, because he's a medieval literature specialist faculty. And so I asked him about that. And he said that actually, the standard a few decades ago was to wear gloves when handling ancient manuscripts. But now people tend to actually just use their bare hands. You like wash your hands right beforehand and make sure that they're like very clean and dry. And it turns out that actually because when you wear gloves, it sort of decreases your manual dexterity. It actually makes you more likely to tear or rip a page. And so they're more worried about that than they are about you getting, like oils from your hands on it. So the trend now is basically to not wear gloves when working with ancient texts.
And Teresa Palmer, the actress, has mentioned that she did some training on handling ancient manuscripts.
Oh, really? That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Although I will say they cut out, or they changed, I suppose, my favorite bit of Diana in the book, where there's a bit where she's talking to a character we haven't met yet in the book, or talking about a character we haven't met yet in the TV show. And she very snarkily thinks, I bet he would have touched the pages. And you can just tell that that's like her worst thought about about how somebody could be. But of course, in the opening, in the TV show, they have her put her full palm against the page, which book Diana never would have done.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. I guess I didn't remember that because it's been so long since I've read it. And so I thought that at the end of these segments, I would kind of like go through what we've learned about the world building and the science that's driving the main plot of the book. So then maybe, we can kind of evaluate how much it makes sense and like how well we think the world building itself holds together. And so from this episode, basically what I took away is that there's three types of human-like creatures: the witches, the vampires, and the demons. The vampires are having trouble siring, and we don't know why. And then Matthew thinks that Ashmole 782 might help them figure out why, because it covers creature origins. But it could also be really dangerous and potentially used to destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you guys have any other comments or thoughts on that. It seems like a good summary. I don't know. And yeah, overall, what I love most about the pilot is that it sets up the scientific problem like right away, much earlier than it does in the book. And it makes it really personal. So the scene with Marcus and Matthew talking in the cafe was one of my favorite parts of the episode, especially that line from Marcus where he says, his last moments were ugly, confused, desperate, and he didn't know why. I did that. He was my friend, and I took his death away from him for nothing. I was just like, oh, God, Marcus, you make me feel so much. Like I can't even imagine like how horrible and guilty he must be feeling in that moment. Yeah, I think the TV show is handling it much better than the book did. But also like I think it's always easier to do it better when you're like the second pass at it, right? Because like the first time you're just trying to create the story, and then the TV show can say like, okay, knowing everything that we know now, like how can we structure it in the most compelling way? So like I don't mean that as shade against Deborah Harkness at all. I just think it's like the TV show is structured in a more compelling
And
way.
you've only read the first book, right?
Correct.
Right.
I've only read the first book.
I will be interested to hear if you have any predictions on how, scientifically speaking, these things get resolved.
Yeah, well, we can maybe talk about that on the last episode, or if you have a wrap-up episode.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I am super impressed with Teresa's rowing technique. One of the curses of being a former rower, or I guess current rower as well, although that's not my status, is that like every time you go to the gym and you see someone on the rowing machine, like usually they have no idea what they're doing, and it just like hurts almost physically to watch them. And so I mean, obviously, like they have a good budget and they can afford to get her a nice trainer and stuff. But I was just sort of like, ooh, I wonder how good her technique is going to be, and I was quite impressed. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and actually, I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on, sort of as we move forward. It's really hard for me not to see this book as a reaction to the Twilight series by Stephenie Meyer. And particularly in this episode, sort of like the way that Matthew is stalking Diana and craving her, it feels like it's taking a lot of the like themes and elements of Twilight and then kind of like tweaking them a little bit to make it better. I mean, in my opinion, better.
Right.
And yeah, because it seems like he's stalking her, creeping around her room, in a way, similar way to how Edward does with Bella, but like he has a much better motivation. It's like not just about a creepy romance, right? Like she has a book that he wants for other reasons. It has nothing to do with her as a potential romantic partner. He's just stalking her because she's the person who has the thing that he wants. And the craving kind of like comes later.
So I genuinely don't think this book would have gotten published if Twilight hadn't already existed, because it was published in 2011, which means the book took place in 2009, so it was probably mostly written in 2009, so it was probably picked up by whatever publisher in 2010, which all that is like right in the middle of when the Twilight movies were coming out and anything vampire could sell. Now, do I think that they stand on their own? Absolutely. But
oh yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I do think that you can very much see the influence, not only in the show, but the book also. Like, there's a bit where in the book that stuck with me from the first time that I read it in 2012 or whatever it was, where Diana describes Matthew as sparkling.
Wait, really?
Yeah, like he's not
God.
actually sparkling. I think she's talking about his smile or something like that. And I'm just like, why would you make that word choice? Why would an editor not be like, maybe no? But so it is heavily influenced by it. Like there's no way around that because it was so heavy in culture at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I really see it as more sort of like looking at Twilight, seeing it as like a flawed work that was like obviously super compelling to a lot of people, and saying like, okay, I think I can take the like attractive parts of this and like the reasons why people like it, and I think I can make it like less problematic and more interesting. and like throw a bunch of history and like stuff that I'm really interested in it. And I think, I mean, obviously this is episode 1, but like largely I think she was pretty successful at it. Although obviously like I we'll talk more about some of my issues with the way she incorporated the evolution sort of as the show progresses. I think obviously she has a lot more experience in history. Um, and so the way she incorporated history was much more successful than the way she incorporated evolution. But, not knowing what happens in the second and third book, I'm actually really curious to see how that goes.
No comment.
Well, thanks for stopping by my lab, and I'll see you guys next week. So this week, I wanted to talk about the voiceover, which was on the previous episode, but we didn't quite have as much context to understand it, and there was so much to talk about alchemy. So all of the episodes start with Matthew saying, "Once the world was full of wonders, but it belongs to humans now. We creatures have all but disappeared." And then he says, "Demons, vampires, and witches." But if you ignore that part, to me, this really reads like a description of what's happening right now on planet Earth, which scientists call the sixth mass extinction. And so, yeah, especially considering that this episode also gives a shout out to climate change, I just like, it's hard for me not to read it in that double meaning that like this book is about the extinction of, mythical human-like creatures, but we're actually like in the middle of a extinction crisis of just ordinary animals and plants and fungi on Earth. So was wondering if that had like crossed your mind at all, or if you sort of were just considering it in the context of the show.
It honestly hadn't crossed my mind at all. But it strikes me as the type of thing that like a work of fiction like this one would do subtly to make it resonate with people that maybe it doesn't cross your mind while you're watching it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Because now that you point it out, I'm like, oh yeah. But I hadn't really thought about it before.
So I'm curious what you guys thought of, the first lab scene where we're getting to see Miriam really kind of like do some sciencey stuff. It was very pretty. Yeah, like overall, I like the set design, and that, I'm totally fine with making science look slightly more attractive and glamorous than it would be in real life. The one part that did make me laugh, though, was when she's looking at just like blobs of blood sitting in a petri dish on the microscope. Because like blood is fairly opaque, and especially when it's like that thick, like you wouldn't be able to see anything because the light just wouldn't be able to penetrate. So normally when you look at blood, you put it on a slide and you put a cover slip on top so it like smooshes the blood down and you get a super thin layer, and then you can like see the individual cells and the light can actually penetrate through them.
I think even I need that.
Yeah.
Because I remember doing that in like middle school.
And like slides are fairly standard for, TV set design. They're not like that fancy. So I was a little bit surprised to see that, but whatever. I also thought it was interesting that she was not wearing any PPE, is what we call personal protective equipment, while working with human blood. If someone came in and saw her doing that, like she would get, she would be in a lot of trouble. Although you do see them drinking wine in the lab, which is also technically against the rules, but like I actually am reluctant to criticize that because I know scientists who eat in their lab environments when they're not supposed to all the time. Like everybody brings coffee everywhere.
And I guess the vampire version of coffee is wine.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's such an interesting thing. I just assumed it was a university lab. I mean, it seems to be on campus just based on sort of like the way they go in and out between there and the library. So I'm guessing it's a university space. I mean, it's pretty standard. I mean, most people don't really have like personal or private labs. Like, I mean, it's possible that as a vampire, they don't really care because they're not susceptible to the same human pathogens that we are. But you at least you'd think that they'd be like trying to blend in a little bit.
I don't know how British universities, colleges work, but I feel like here in North America, somebody like Matthew could give the university a crap ton of money and be like, this is my lab now, stay out.
So, yes, you could probably self-fund a lab, but if you are in a university like physical space, you'd still have to follow all of their rules and regulations or they would get in a lot of trouble. Like, you regular people who have to go through like just sexual harassment training don't know how good you have it compared to like the amount of training that I have to go through every time I start a new job. It's like animal welfare training, radiation safety training, chemical safety training. Like, there's just like so much red tape that even if you were self-funded, like you still have to follow environmental health and safety protocols. Your like vent hoods and everything is like still hooked up to the same air handling system as everyone else's. You still have to like get rid of your biohazardous waste through their systems.
Right.
And of course, in this episode, we get to find out that Matthew was friends with Darwin, which is super cool. And I think it really, puts the show's questions about the origins of creatures in a evolutionary and historical context that is really cool. And so we'll talk a little bit more about Darwin in the next episode because some other stuff comes up then.
I do think this is also the first hints that we get about how old Matthew is. So It's a really good scene all around.
Yeah. And so the second lab scene I really loved overall, but it had one cringeworthy moment for me, which was kind of like approaching the kind of things that I really didn't like about the book, where, there were just a lot of times in the book where Matthew would say something that like a real evolutionary biologist would just never say.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he's introducing Diana to the lab, he says, we're among hundreds of laboratories using genetics to study species origins, but in our lab, humans aren't the only species we study. And so Matthew should know better that, like, most evolutionary biology and genetics labs don't study humans. Like, humans are one of, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of species on the Earth. And so, like, most labs that study species origins don't study humans. They study, like, beetles or plants or, sea lions or whatever. So I think it would have been better if he had said something like, but we study, secret creatures or something.
It could be possible that they just couldn't find a good way to say that. Like, that's what they were going for, but, like, I can't think of a way to word that better.
Yeah, it just strikes me as, like a very Hollywood type of mistake to make, is that, like, well, clearly all scientists just study humans because humans are the coolest, most important,
right,
organisms on the planet. But I did love the mitochondrial DNA charts that they put together. And so I took some screen caps and I'll find a place to post them where you can link to them in the show notes. But so I thought I would just maybe walk through that a little bit, and feel free to skip ahead 30 seconds if this is not your jam. But I thought I could just explain a little bit about sort of like what mitochondria are and what the chart is actually showing. So mitochondria are organelles. They're actually they used to be like free living bacteria that our cells sort of like captured, harnessed, and then enslaved, maybe, if you will. We've incorporated them into our cellular structure, and we basically use them to process energy, right? On Schoolhouse Rock, they say mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And so because they started out as an independent organism that we've captured and incorporated into our cells, they have their own genome. So the circle that you're seeing there is the mitochondrial genome. And you can see it's 17,000 base pairs long. So DNA, the sequence of the DNA is a sequence of base pairs. So the sequence has almost 17,000 items in it.
I'm sorry, where do we see this?
Oh, are you looking at it?
Which one? Are we on Benvenguta?
It doesn't matter.
Okay,
they're actually the same. It's just, they got rid of some numbers. Yeah, so each of the little colored chunks is a gene that codes for either a protein or an RNA that's performing some function. So, right. So the way maybe this is useful to know because this whole, if the premise of the show is that witches are losing mutations, it makes sense to think about what mutations actually are. So a mutation is when the sequence of the DNA changes from what it was before, and that can sometimes have an impact on how the organism functions, or sometimes it can have no impact. A marker could be a mutation, but it's really kind of just what it says. Like a marker, it's a known sequence that tells you something else about the genome or the sequences around it. So for instance, there can be like really complex sets of mutations that are often inherited together. And a marker could be just one of those mutations, or maybe even not the mutation that causes the effect, but just something that happens to be nearby that they know is associated with it. So it's a marker is just a sequence that you know something about, and then it tells you something about the sequence nearby, but the marker isn't necessarily what you're interested in itself. It just tells you about what you're interested in. I don't know if that made any sense.
Yes. I sound very confident.
Yeah, so the mitochondrial DNA that we're looking at, the sort of the big colored chunks are the larger genes, that the proteins that kind of like perform important actions in the mitochondria, and the RNA, some bigger RNA segments that also perform important functions. And then there's all those little blue stripes that you can kind of see around the edges.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the tRNA structures, it's the DNA that codes for the tRNA that allows the mitochondria to synthesize proteins. And so that's why they're all really small, because tRNA are sort of like tiny structures compared to an enzyme or a big RNA structure. It takes a lot more sequence to code for those.
Okay.
And so that's why a lot of those labels, if you are getting flashbacks to your high school biology class and thinking like, oh, those sound like amino acids, that's because they're labeled for the tRNAs that are used to link those amino acids and proteins. So there's like the tyrosine tRNA, the cysteine tRNA. Each amino acid has its own tRNA that's used to link it into a protein. And you can totally cut all of that if you want, or like paste it at the end. I don't know. I found it, if people are super science nerds, they might find that interesting. Oh, so here's something that I do think is kind of interesting. So the human mitochondrial DNA in real life only has 34 genes on it. But according to the labels here, it says protein synthesis 149. So I think maybe they just wanted it to seem like there were more proteins involved, or was like more important than it actually was. They just sort of like made the number bigger.
Okay.
34 didn't seem flashy enough. But yeah, in general, the mitochondria is like, I mean, it's hugely important to the functioning of the cell, right? Like, you would not survive without your mitochondria. And there are a ton of very serious genetic diseases that are caused by mutations in the mitochondria. But the mitochondria is really only a small proportion of our genome. So the human genome has about 3 billion base pairs, and this mitochondrial DNA has about 17,000. So it's like a tiny, tiny fraction of the total DNA. And so it seems weird that all of the genes for witchcraft would be only located on the mitochondria. It seems like they would probably be more sprinkled throughout the whole genome. So I think what they tried to do is basically use the mitochondrial genome as a stand-in for the larger genome. And so it's more manageable. Yeah, I mean, like, you can show it all in one chart and actually have mutations labeled on it. Like the full human genome being 3 billion base pairs, you know, like, you can't even really show it on one chart. And, you know, there's like 23 times 2 chromosomes. That's crazy. So I think it was a very good visual choice that they chose to just zero in on the mitochondrial genome. The other thing that's really interesting about the mitochondrial genome is that it is inherited matrilineally. So you know, most of your chromosomes, you get one from your mom and one from your dad. And then when you're getting ready to pass on your genes to your offspring, your maternal and your paternal chromosomes, they actually like mix together. So what you pass on is a combination of what you got from your mom and what you got from your dad. But your mitochondria, since you got all of it from your mom, she got it all from her mom, you can really track inheritance in a kind of cool and different way, and in a slightly more powerful way with mitochondria. So I think the other reason why they chose to just show the mitochondrial genome is because they're talking about, was that in this episode or was that oh no, they hint at it. Yeah. So yeah. And so we'll learn more in the next episode a little bit about how they're using mitochondria to track these like original clans of witches. But that's actually something that they can do in real human populations, is basically like track descendants on a really big scale using mitochondrial DNA and show, you know, that like big regions sort of like all descended in, you know, from one woman, sort of like as one clan group. And so I wrote down one other quote that I think kind of tells us some interesting stuff about the science. So I think it was Marcus who said, or was it Matthew? Do you remember?
The Beatrice Good quote?
Actually, it was Matthew.
Yeah, that's Matthew.
So Matthew says, Beatrice Good shows far fewer markers common amongst witches, indicating that her ancestors, as the centuries passed, relied less and less upon witchcraft to survive. Now, is this pattern of denying power the reason why witches will eventually become extinct? And so I just wanted to unpack this a little bit, because this actually is this is kind of invoking a little bit of Darwinian theory and sort of like evolutionary biology, but it's not really explaining it that well. And so basically, so what he's saying is these special traits that are only seen in witches are decreasing in number sort of as time is progressing forward. And so it seems like there's some kind of selection, is how Darwin would phrase it, against them. So basically, that for some reason, the witches that have fewer of these markers are actually surviving better and living to produce more offspring, because that's really the only Darwinian way that you could get these markers decreasing in number through time. And so basically, like, there's some sort of negative penalty for having these markers. Like, you know, if you get caught using your powers, and then maybe you get killed by an angry mob or something. I think that's sort of at least that's what the evolutionary biologist in me wants to read into it.
As a regular old person, I don't know where I was going with that. That's how I always interpreted it also, that like throughout the years, either throughout the years, the witches who did their best to fit in better and blend in were the ones who survived. And therefore, witches were losing their magic.
Yeah, and so that basically, like, if you have less powers, it's easier for you to blend in. Of course, there's also a kind of Lamarckian way to interpret that. So I don't know if you remember this from high school biology. So Lamarck was the guy who said that the reason why giraffes have such long necks is because they like strain and like stretch really far, and they stretch their neck and make it a little bit longer, and then they pass those on to their offspring. And so I think like if you just take his words at face value, there's a way to interpret that as basically like, as you use your powers less, you're less likely to pass them on to your offspring. But I'm going to trust Matthew that he's too smart for that, and he isn't actually thinking in that way.
Right. I don't even think, well, like, if I did learn about this dude in high school, I do not remember him.
He and Darwin had, like, a big feud. So Darwin and Lamarck were arguing over are changes in organisms over time. So, yeah, Darwin was very opposed to the idea that things that happen to an organism in its life,
right,
that those characteristics can be passed on to their offspring, whereas Lamarck definitely thought that they could.
Oh.
So I don't think we learned that much new about the science and the world building in this episode, but we do kind of flesh out what we already know a little bit more. So now we know that all of the creatures are dying out, not just vampires. We learned that the demons are having mental health problems that's leading to suicides, and witches are losing their powers gradually over generations. And there's some strong indication that genetics and evolution is involved in the cause, and it's going to feature prominently in the story.
Yeah. Non-sciencey. Is there anything else non-sciencey that you wanted to discuss today?
Just that I feel like the Twilight comparisons keep on getting better and better. Like, you know, Matthew's like super old and super rich, and, you know, I think people might be tempted to, sort of like accuse it a little bit of wish fulfillment, but like, I don't think there's anything wrong with some wish fulfillment as long as it's well done.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. Like at some point, like you have to try enough, like get rich schemes that like one of them is going to work out. And also just like, you know, the time value of money.
Yeah. Like invest $20. So, 500 years ago, and presumably you're rich now.
And also, I really enjoyed the book, but I never really bought into the romance when I was reading the book. Like, the chemistry didn't really feel real to me. And so I was really surprised by how much I was, like, starting to buy into the chemistry between Diana and Matthew by the end of this episode. And I really loved that she came to him at the end of the episode, because I think part of building any good romance is that you kind of have like both partners sequentially escalating things back and forth. And that was kind of like, again, like one of the things that I really didn't like about Twilight is it just felt like, you know, Bella was super passive and just like waiting to be pursued. And I love that Diana is doing some pursuing of her own.
Yeah, me too. I'd never really thought of it that way before, but I do like that about Diana.
Cool. Well, thanks for stopping by my lab, and I'll see you guys next week. So my main takeaway from this episode is that demons can be born to humans. And, you know, this really throws a wrench into the idea of creatures as separate species, because in biology, we think of, like, by definition, a species is sort of like a group of organisms that can breed within each other and only within each other. You know, like a cat doesn't give birth to a dog, a bear doesn't give birth to a cow.
Ruin all my
And so
dreams.
I know, I'm really sorry. And so that's like really one of the defining characteristics between like what makes something a species versus what is just a trait, or what we might call like a phenotype or a morph. You know, so like a brown dog can give birth to a white dog, and that's what makes brown dogs and white dogs not different species.
Right.
And so going back to Darwin, Matthew's good friend, he would have called this true breeding in on the origins of species. And so the fact that, you know, demons and humans and witches are not necessarily true breeding, it was like one of my problems with the book. I mean, more so the language surrounding it, but it does make me really curious about where the books and the series is going, as far as like the ultimate conclusion.
Right. No comment.
Yeah. So this is the episode where they're talking about the forums, and Sophie's boyfriend
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel mentions that demons can be born to humans and like grow up not knowing what they are, and then like needing a community and like support. And as a book reader, I really appreciated the sort of like shout out to book Matthew's like weird wolf stuff. I think it's great that the TV show didn't include it, because that was actually like another one of my complaints about the book, and sort of like TV shows and books in general, is that, you know, scientists don't have appropriately narrow expertises. They're sort of like, oh, you can be like a physicist and a biologist and a chemist. And so in the book, Matthew is both a geneticist and an expert in like wolf behavior and ecology. And those are like, for the most part, pretty separate disciplines, and no one would really be that good at both of them. I mean, he's been alive a long time, so you can kind of explain it that
Mm-hmm.
way. He's had a lot of time to master different things. But both modern ecology and modern genetics haven't really been around that long. So I also really liked the twist on vampire lore here, that they're not undead exactly. They're not just sort of like mystically animated corpses. They're more like differently alive. So Matthew talks about how they have really efficient energy use, and it's not that they don't breathe or their hearts don't beat. It's just that their hearts don't need to beat very often, and so that's why they don't need to breathe that much
Mm-hmm.
either. They're, you know, don't have to oxygenate the blood as
Just
much.
to bring this sort of all around, I've always wondered how much of that is influenced by Twilight, because I think pre-Twilight people didn't mess with vampires that often.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I'd just be
No, that's true, and because like uh, Stephanie Meyer did. I mean, I could be wrong about this, but I think she was the first person to try and come up with a genetic explanation for vampires. And so I believe in the Twilight universe, vampires have an extra chromosome or something.
oh my God, I thought that was these books.
No, I think that's Twilight.
Because there is discussion.
Is that
There
also in
is
here? Maybe that's not in the first
there
book.
is chromosome discussion in these books, but I forget exactly what it was.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure in Twilight. Yeah, so in Twilight, humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes and vampires have 25
Oh,
pairs.
interesting.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that as we go forward. I'm not rereading Twilight, but I maybe I'll spend some time on Wikipedia. And then finally, in this episode, they talk about the four original witch clans, which goes back to what we were talking about last episode about the mitochondrial DNA being passed down by the maternal lineage. And so it makes sense that if a lot of the witch markers were on the mitochondrial genome, that you would be able to analyze them and narrow it down to like the four original clans.
I'm liking how much of the science does appear to be making sense from your end.
Yeah, for the most part, the science is actually pretty well done. Most of my problems with the book were not with the science itself. It was more with like the specific language around some of the
Right.
science. Where like I felt like if she had just gotten a biologist to kind of like read through it and just like clean up the dialogue a little bit, it could have been so much better. And especially, given how much she clearly, cares about different disciplines and like history and is like super detail oriented along that line.
Right.
I feel like it made she could have easily just like found an expert at her university. I mean, I don't know, maybe as a professor, you like don't want to share your vampire fiction book with your coworkers from other departments and be like, can you read this and tell me if this makes sense?
That would be an interesting lunch hour.
Yeah, so again, this episode didn't add a whole lot to the science and world building, but we get the hint that at least demons aren't species in the way that we're used to thinking about them. And we did find out about the four original witch clans, so that's something to keep an eye on. It might become important later on, since we do keep hearing so much about the bishops and Diana's ancestors.
All right.
So one of my favorite things about the book that I think the show also does really well is showing how clearly Diana is driven by her intellectual curiosity. Her growing interest in the Ashmole manuscript and in Matthew, it all totally makes sense based on her characterization as a historian and an academic. And I just like all of the, maybe like bad or unwise decisions that she makes, I totally buy them. And I'm just like starting to really love Diana and appreciate her. And again, like I mentioned last episode, in this episode, we again have Matthew and Diana sort of taking turns pursuing each other, and I think it's really building up the romance in a good way. I also, so we don't need to discuss this here, but I would love to hear your thoughts on vampirism as a sex metaphor, because I feel like that's made really explicit in this episode. Sort of like the whole idea of like there being a temptation to feed and then having to resist that and then like ultimately either like giving in or not. I think that idea is like really emphasized a lot in the show and in Twilight, much more than Buffy, and those are like really the only three vampire universes that I'm familiar with. And yeah, and I guess just on Buffy, I felt like most of her vampire romances were not really about bloodlust itself in the same way that Twilight and now A Discovery of Witches is like, I don't know, something about like the bloodlust of vampirism feels much more central to the romance here. And so yeah, I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Do you want them now?
Oh, I mean, yeah, sure, we can talk about it now.
Well, I'm not really prepared to, but my general thoughts
Yeah.
is even if an author doesn't intend for it to come across as a sex metaphor, the original, well, not the original, but like Dracula was really written as kind of a big part of that was a sex metaphor. So a lot of the times, if you just stick to the lore, it happens whether or not you want it to.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I definitely think the sex metaphor is there in Buffy. It's just like less
Yeah.
central. It's like less emphasized. I mean, but there is in Buffy there is too like an element of sort of like danger and wrongness, and in the way that like, his traditionally sex has also been treated as like a dangerous and wrong thing. And so I think there's like something that's kind of encoded in us societally
Yeah.
to like think about sex that way as much as we try not
I
to.
think a lot of this will come up in later episodes. But the thing about Discovery of Witches is it's one of the very few vampire fictions that just will talk about sex explicitly. Not so it loses some of the metaphor there because it doesn't need it.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely see that.
So like you get the metaphor in early episodes, but I think it more is just about the bringing together of them. And metaphor-wise, I think the show or the book concentrates a lot more on alchemy and how the metaphors in that and how they can relate to the characters.
That's a really good point. Sorry, I was just kind of like sitting here and thinking about how it's always like a male vampire and a female human, and how like what that says about gender relations and like who's tempted.
Yeah.
And like and the different burdens that the different sexes bear for like having to resist sex traditionally. No, that's true. And like Buffy just had so much time that they were able to, I think, come at it from a lot of different angles. But when you think about like Buffy definitely started with like her and Angel. Well, thanks for stopping by the lab. I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this science-heavy bonus episode. I hope you found it interesting. Remember, you can always find the show on Twitter at DesireMadeReal and give us a shout if you have any questions for Dr. Anya or anything else. And you can find more Eloquent Gushing shows at eloquentgushing.com, as well as on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Eloquent Gushing. And until we meet again, remember that with every ending, there's a new beginning.
I don't know if you can hear that train, if I should wait for it to go past. This is a bad thing about recording during rush hour. Okay, there's another train. I'm so sorry. This is literally the time of day in which there's like a train every few minutes. Sorry, another train.
Where do you live that there are so many trains?
It's a commuter train. It's actually the commuter train that I use.
Oh.
So like I purposely chose to live this close to it.
That makes sense then.
So a mutation is just, oh my god, this fucking train. Oh, see, that was an express train. You can tell because it's going much faster. Thanks for checking out my lab, ladies. I don't know.